Venezuela has a new cryptocurrency. It's called the Petro, and it's backed by the country's oil and mineral reserves. Is it any kind of answer to the country's economic crisis, or, as some claim, simply a scam? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. So you are a country that has effectively run out of money. You can't print anymore. Is a cryptocurrency, a digital currency, a way out of financial ruin? And what happens when you have the added complications of US financial sanctions, such as Venezuela has?
A smart ploy or a desperate move? President Nicolas Maduro says the launch of cryptocurrency, the Petro, will rescue Venezuela.
Frente a Superman surgió la kriptonita perfecta, la criptomoneda, el Petro.
But in a country torn apart by a political and economic crisis, will the world's first state-backed cryptocurrency be a success or plunge Venezuela further into chaos?
¡Que viva el Petro!
At a live TV event, Maduro predicted the Petro would put Venezuela on the world's economic vanguard. Pre-sales had him feeling confident.
Haber llegado a 735 millones de dólares en 20 horas dice que vamos bien.
Each Petro's price will depend on the price of a barrel of Venezuelan oil. Officials say 100 million Petro will be worth an estimated $6 billion. The Petro will be a form of legal tender that can be used to pay taxes, fees and other public needs. But debt is being renegotiated and government policies have brought skyrocketing inflation. Analysts say the lack of trust in the government means there are no guarantees.
Entonces yo le podría trasladar esa desconfianza o esa carencia de confianza al Petro tranquilamente porque es el mismo emisor.
Already traders have been warned by the US Treasury Department that investing would violate US financial sanctions. And there are other obstacles to overcome. Cryptocurrencies can be volatile, and crude production in Venezuela has been steadily declining, exacerbated by an oil price slump.
Eso podría contribuir en algo, pero no es directamente la solución.
Even if the economy does rally, the political crisis will continue. The opposition has vowed to boycott the election in April unless Maduro guarantees it will be free and fair.
Así no podemos participar. Así no vamos a participar.
If President Maduro loses the election or is forced out of power, the Petro could be made illegitimate. And even if he stays, will it be redeemable for the assets that are underlying it? How much more will citizens tolerate? This cryptocurrency test case is being executed on very shaky ground.
And we travel first at this roundtable to Caracas, capital of Venezuela, where we're going to get the thoughts of Manuel Egana, co-founder and director of TOREGA Capital. We also go to Atlanta, in the United States. Jeffrey Tucker's there, editorial director of the American Institute for Economic Research. With me in the studio, Silvia Pavoni, economics editor of The Banker, part of the Financial Times, the FT, and Chris Watling, the founder and chief executive officer of Longview Economics. Warm welcome to every single one of you. I'm going to start with you two in the studio first, and then to you on Skype in Venezuela and the United States. Simple question. You two, first of all. Chris, is this going to work?
Yes, no, it's not going to work, no.
Sylvia?
No.
You two? Manuel first.
No.
And Jeffrey?
I don't think it.
There is nothing about the Petro that makes any sense whatsoever.
Okay, now we've established that you're all skeptics and Maduro would like to prove you wrong. Let me start, first of all, with you, Chris, and say why on earth, when you're not the only ones who say it's a hopeless idea, completely bonkers, it's never going to take off. Why would a country that is effectively bankrupt think this might be the solution to its problems?
Well, in one sense, if they were actually doing it properly, it would be quite a good idea to have a currency backed by oil. I mean, Venezuela is, of course, has the largest oil reserves in the world. It's a very wealthy country in that sense. And if you actually issued a currency that was genuinely backed by oil that people could trust, and it was exchangeable for oil, which it isn't, it's not exchangeable for oil, then you might start stabilizing the monetary system and stabilizing growth. Venezuela has hyperinflation because it prints too much money. So the trick to beating that, as we've seen several times in Eastern Europe, post-Russian, post-Soviet Union dissolution, Weimar Republic, Germany, there's so many examples. The way to beat hyperinflation is to control your money supply. So if you issue a currency that's backed by something that's physical and limited in supply, you do that.
Well, in a sense, in a sense, that is what's happening, isn't it, Silvia? Because it is something that's physical, is the oil, that's limited in supply. It's as much as you want to take out of the ground as you can, or not. So why, by that definition, is it not going to work?
Because the key word here, I think, is trust. And another key word is transparency. And these words are necessary in any monetary system, including cryptocurrencies. And that's something that Venezuela really doesn't have. So that's the reason, I think, why the four of us here do not really believe that the Petro is workable, and why I personally haven't found anybody who thinks it's a good idea, because unfortunately this is a government that hasn't proved to be able to manage an economy, let alone a cryptocurrency.
Okay, Manuel, in your business and in your social life at all, have you found anybody who thinks this might work? And therefore, how is the government of Venezuela trying to overcome what appears to be absolute pessimism about its multi-billion-dollar idea?
Well, what I actually think is that this is a way that they're trying to get some quick money. Because this is an election year. But not really an election year, since the opposition has boycotted all the elections because
a Maduro coronation year, shall we call it that?
I'm sorry?
Let's call it the Maduro coronation year.
Exactly. And the thing is that it's illegal for in Venezuela, you can't use the oil reserves as guarantee for anything. It's against the Constitution.
Okay, so two things I want to ask you about specifically, and we'll get on to broader subjects in just a moment, Manuel, and then I'll come to you, Jeffrey. Maduro has already said that $750 million worth of Petros have been sold, but there's no proof of that. Am I right?
You should be able to see that money on the NEM blockchain, because as of now, it's a public blockchain. Then they're gonna turn it to a private blockchain. But apparently, if you go according to the experts from Caracas Chronicles, if you go and see at the public blockchain of NEM, there's only one account that has Petro.
Okay, so nobody necessarily believes this $750 million that has been sold. And the president's now ordering Venezuelan companies, certain companies, that they must buy. What's happening there?
Well, that doesn't make any sense either, since you can't buy the petros in Bolivar, and you have an exchange control in Venezuela. So I don't know how he expects Venezuelan companies to be able to buy the petro.
Okay, Jeffrey, what about U.S. sanctions? I mean, I think U.S. authorities have already said this is not going to work. I mean, what is the reaction in America about this?
I mean, the U.S. has a very imperialist attitude towards Venezuela, which I kind of regret. I don't favor these sanctions. I think they're a little bit ridiculous. And they kind of give Maduro a scapegoat for his own economic problems. He's the cause of his own economic problems, not the U.S., but the U.S. keeps giving him an excuse to demonize Trump and so on. But I want to go back quickly to this Petro issue. It looks as if the government is the only owner of this crypto. So I don't know what that means. I mean, how can you have a market valuation for this thing with a single owner? There's no market for this thing. In a free market, this Petro would be worth probably absolutely zero.
Well, it's brilliant, isn't it? It means it's a scam. It's a circular story, isn't it? Which is what you're alluding to, Jeffrey, I assume.
You know, and there's a very interesting aspect to this. Like, if the government really wanted a cryptocurrency, there are many cryptos currently circulating in Venezuela that are actually doing rather well.
Okay, explain you guys here why you think it's a scam. In what sense?
Well, I mean, in a sense, it's a confidence
Keep it
trick,
simple, because I don't understand.
Well, the government, on one hand, is issuing, and by the sounds of things, it's not clear, but it sounds of things, there's not many buyers.
Yeah.
And it's then instructing its companies that it owns to buy it. So we're just going around in circles.
So effectively, it's telling these companies that they have to give the government money.
Yeah, so it's a confidence trick. The government issues with one hand, and with another hand, it effectively buys. So it's actually, if your guest in Venezuela is correct, it's a bit of a confidence trick, presumably to create the impression they're raising money.
Jeffrey, I thought you were pretty damning in your assessment of this, describing the Petro as, well, it rhymed with Bitcoin and it was an unflattering beginning of the word. I'd leave people to work that out for themselves.
Look, I'm very active in crypto markets, reading white papers every day. There's a new coin being distributed every day. There are very strict standards in the markets for these things. You can't just, put out a white paper and then change overnight the blockchain that you're going to issue it on. You can't do a pre-sale that's not publicly available. You can't have a single buyer. And it doesn't actually, nothing about this coin makes any sense.
And yet, in principle, I believe you think that something like this is a reasonable idea. It's just that you just can't do it in a country like Venezuela.
No, the government's not trustworthy and this coin is not trustworthy. But there are plenty of cryptos that are currently circulating and doing very well in Venezuela. It's one of the great ironies that Venezuela has a very active crypto market. Smart cash is used on the streets. Bitcoin is the nice final settlement layer. People are using Dash and Monero and all these coins. And here's what I find really, really interesting. The Bolivar, of course, totally destroyed. There has been a hard fork take place in the value of the Bolivar itself. So that hard versions of the Bolivar are trading at a much higher valuation than digital versions. And so you have whole companies that are busy arbitraging between the hard currency and the digital version. I mean,
we'll go back to Caracas in just a moment. I saw Silvia here nodding your head.
Yeah, that just complicates things even further. I mean, you have the digital Bolivar moving not in sync with the actual Bolivar. The Bolivar, which has stunk, has lost pretty much half of its value in just 1 year. Then you have this new currency, which is initially linked to the value of the oil basket of Venezuela, around $60. So where does that leave us? Which kind of economy are we going to be dealing with? And the other interesting thing I find is that apparently to buy the Petro, you need to use a foreign currency, not the Bolivar. So it's just a way of raising foreign currency, which the Venezuela government is really run out of, which is why it has technically defaulted on a number of payments.
Manuel, let me go back to you. We talk about the Bolivar. Silvia just mentioned the Bolivar has lost half its value in 1 year. Just tell us about daily life in Caracas or in other parts of Venezuela when it comes to, we're seeing your currency basically worthless now.
Well, this is crazy. I mean, when you go to one place and buy a meal and then you go the next week and buy the same meal, it's almost twice the price. I mean, there's no stopping this inflation. And while I agree that some higher social classes in Venezuela have been able to use Bitcoin and Monero and other big cryptocurrencies, the sad truth is that most Venezuelans actually make about $4 a month. So they can't actually go into the crypto market. They don't even own a smartphone.
You see, I've looked at this country, I have friends who are Venezuelan, and I've looked at it from afar, never having been there, and thought what a wonderful country it could be. Do the people of your country just scratch their heads and think, well, how come we ever got in this mess?
Well, I think most people know by now how we got into this mess.
Yeah. And he's no longer with you, but his protege is. For how long?
That's, I can't even answer that. I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, as you said, this is the year of the coronation.
Yeah.
And we will have to see how that ends up happening.
How do you two think here, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Manuel, but how do you two think here Venezuela could get itself out of this mess?
Well, I mean, clearly they need a new leadership, and they need. I mean, it's not clear how you get to the way of solving hyperinflation is not complicated. The economics is not difficult. What's difficult is getting the leadership to actually come in and take the actions and getting the right leadership to do it. So hyperinflation is not complicated. Economists understand it. There are multiple examples over the last 150 years in particular, and there are multiple examples of how to get out of it. But you need the leadership. That's the point.
But you're also concerned that the price of oil, which we know went from over 100 down to 26, I think, is now back up at about 60 in the basket of currencies. You, Chris, believe it will tank again and go down to $10 a barrel because we're all going to have electric this, electric that, renewable this and renewable that, and we won't need.
Yeah, to be fair, that is a long-term forecast. It's a sort of 10 to 15 year forecast.
That's not very long.
That's not outrageously long, but...
So what Venezuela has in abundance won't be worth anything anyway?
No, but certainly for now it's got value, and the market price of oil is $60 today. So, you know, and that's our forecast. We could, of course, be wrong. I mean,
no, but it does make sense, and you do hear other people, you know, worrying about this. Financial institutions, banks worried about stranded assets in oil-related industries. But the other thing about Venezuela is that it does have the largest proven oil reserves in the world, but its ability to get the oil out of the ground is actually not as strong. So it doesn't produce as much as Saudi Arabia, for example. And this ability has been deteriorating over the years.
Because of
for
lack of
various reasons, lack of investments. To be honest, even lack of people. So a lot of people are leaving the country now, which, you know, you might assume also the people who know about how to turn these companies around, the ones with the technical skills. The other side of the coin is that once the middle classes start to leave the country, and we're seeing now Colombia and Brazil dealing with essentially a migration crisis from Venezuela, you also lose the kind of important pressure on the political machine to do the right thing. And with elections coming up, supposedly in April, with how things are at the moment, I don't think anyone is positive about
Jeffrey, let me ask you this from a US general point of view. Rather than specifically the petro or cryptocurrencies. When it comes to the economic situation of Venezuela, what dangers does the US see in a country like this, so desperate for some kind of income, if you like, that it's doing, well, it's launched the petro, but it doesn't have any money, it could well go bankrupt, and what dangers are there really for the United States there?
Well, the U.S., of course, always wants to see stability in the region, and are very concerned about the Maduro regime as a kind of an enemy regime. And part of the purpose of this crypto, I think, might be to get around the sanctions. I mean, the idea of a blockchain technology is that it doesn't use financial intermediaries, right? So I think that the theory was that if we issue a crypto, that we can somehow sneak around these sanctions. And there may be some truth to that. A well-constructed cryptocurrency backed by a government might actually help break the sanctions. I don't think that this is one that's going to work.
Still, exactly. I was going to say, you know, with the words you said, if I mean, it had this, if it had that, then it could work, but it doesn't have any of those things apparently, does it?
So, am I right? I think that this might be the world's first government crypto. And if this is a story of things to come, a foretelling of things to come, it doesn't look like cryptocurrency and governments go well together, actually.
Right, so the Petro is the first case in the world of a government backing a cryptocurrency. But then the other thing, which is what you, Jeffrey, are sort of suggesting, is that then other governments who are also US sanctions started thinking, we've heard news about potentially Iran even thinking about launching their own cryptocurrency.
Russia?
Yes, so even China.
North Korea?
Well, the possibilities are endless, almost. But so then why does that lead cryptocurrencies as a force for evil? You're shaking your head.
There's not. Sorry. I was just going to say it's not what cryptos are about. I mean, it's not about.
That's right.
They're not about government issues.
But it's the other side of the coin that being used in theory to
it's abuse of what cryptos is meant to be anti-government, and came in response, as Jeffrey, I'm sure, would tell you, to the financial crisis, and you know, huge issuance of money and an attempt by those outside government in the mind to control the money supply of governments and control the government power ultimately. So the idea of government issuing a crypto is slightly slightly ironic.
Hey, Manuel, let me ask you this one. Sorry, Jeff, you can jump in just a second, but I wanted, with your TOREGA capital, how much money are you seeing, if any, coming into the country and being invested? Or are you taking people's money that they think is unsafe in Venezuela and putting it elsewhere for them?
How much money for the Petro?
No. I'm talking about just general in your business, TOREGA Capital.
Oh, I mean, most people just want to open now just a cryptocurrencies account here in Venezuela. That's what they really want.
And are you seeing a lot of money flowing out of the country?
Well, obviously, I mean, most people, if they want to invest in Venezuela, they only ask about oil, because both imports and exports are very controlled by the government, especially those related to food, and that's what we need more in this country. And they're all run by the military now.
Okay, I'm wondering how you think Maduro and other people in the government will be able to save face over this, because that's going to be pretty important. I mean, if it isn't actually working and the international community says it has tanked and there's no evidence that it hasn't, how are they going to continue banging its drum, Manuel?
I don't know. They're obviously going to say that everything they've done and the Petro, and they still say that the revolution has been a success. They're going to keep that line. I mean, you know that this socialist governments, they never admit defeat. Yeah. It's part of propaganda is saying that they've brought education to the population and they're fighting for equality, and we have to blame the US and the EU. So that's what they're going to say.
Presumably, if you control the supply of the crypto and also you're instructing your companies to buy it, you can control the price to a degree. And so what you do is you can withdraw, essentially your government-controlled companies withdraw a chunk of the crypto from the market. So you shrink the free float. So you can manipulate the price in this instance. And you can create that image of a successful Petro. It is possible. I mean, they may not be able to achieve it, but if they want to issue a gold-backed one, then presumably...
this is where I was coming next.
Yeah, you need to create that impression, exactly. So I suspect that's why they're telling government-controlled companies to buy the Petro to make it look like it's a success.
They are talking about launching the Petro gold.
These all
it does have a lot of gold, doesn't it? It's not just oil.
Yes, it does. A fantastic resource, availability of gold underground. But the thing is that, so you can make it look like a success, the Petro, the gold Petro, whatever. But then at the end of the day, this is a country that needs to meet its obligations with foreign investors. So that's the real issue. So it can't just look like a success. It has to be a success. So Venezuela is running out of foreign reserves. How is it going to pay? How is it going to pay its foreign investors? And also the main investor, the main partner here for Venezuela, China, in terms again of oil, also has started showing some signs of displeasement.
This is rather like the tulip bubble, isn't it? In a sense, if we're talking about something based... Well, in Holland, of course, it went completely crazy. Yeah. Several hundred years ago, people lost a lot of money. But I'm thinking about, could South Africa end up with a diamond cryptocurrency? Could Idaho end up with a potato one, Jeffrey? Could the east of England end up with a Brussels sprouts one?
I mean, I think Jeffrey might think differently, but I think you can make an argument that Bitcoin itself is like tulip mania. And, you know, there is, I can see the purpose, the original purpose for them, but it's not clear to me that that's exactly the way Bitcoins and all this cryptocurrencies are playing out. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels with tulip mania. And if you look at the history of financial bubbles, this is the second biggest bubble throughout several centuries of history after tulip mania. It's bigger than the South Sea bubble. It's bigger than the sort of tech bubble. I mean, it really shoots the lights out in terms of
and when is it going to go bang and sort of sting people in the eyes?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's a very interesting question. I think it's not so much for the Petro, but for the whole country. The real answer is that I don't know, and none of the people I've spoken to do know. Someone I was asking this recently was saying, well, just look at Zimbabwe. I mean, Mugabe stayed in power for 40 years and without oil.
Okay. And Jeffrey, just a final word, if we may. Are you looking at this with amusement or trepidation?
Oh, well, this kind of skepticism about cryptocurrency, I don't share it. I think it's an exciting innovation. I don't know the right price. It's between 1/16 of a penny and $1 billion. That's the purpose of the market, to discover what the right price should be. But you have to have a market, and it has to operate freely. these government cryptos are not really operating as market currencies, and so they're not to be trusted.
Okay, quick final word from Caracas, from Manuel. You hopeful for your country in the next 10, 15 years, or you just got to bite the bullet for 20 and see what happens?
I'm hopeful for my country once we get a new government. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't see them staying in power that long. People are way too hungry. I mean, when you go out the street, you see kids eating out of garbage trucks. So I don't know how much this can last.
Okay. Well, Venezuela, we're going to have to leave it, Jeffrey, I'm afraid. Venezuela is in the headlines once again because of the launch of this Petro currency. Perhaps Petro gold, all of the things. But unfortunately, as we've just heard from Manuel in Caracas, there are people who are going extremely hungry out there, people who are in the most dire financial straits, and that does not make the headlines. We were sort of giggling about this just a little bit, but it is a very serious matter. So thank you all very much indeed for coming on Roundtable. From me, David Foster, and the team, thanks for watching. We hope to have your company next time. Bye-bye for now.